Good evening, and we'll continue with the preparations for taking the Bodhisattva vow, or generate bodhicitta by means of ritual. So, in fact, there are two different ways of taking the Bodhisattva vow, or ritually taking or generating the bodhicitta. There's the lineage of Arya Nagarjuna, who was the founder of the middle way philosophy. And there's the Arya Asanga's method or lineage. So this text, Bodhisattvacharya Avatara, the way of the Bodhisattva, it is a Madhyamika text, so it mainly follows the Nagarjuna's method. In Nagarjuna's method, or in Nagarjuna's lineage, because the view is so vast, the method, how you take the Bodhisattva vow is more open. For instance, in order to take the Bodhisattva vow, in this tradition, Nagarjuna's tradition, you don't have to take the vows of a celibate, like monks or nuns vow. You don't need to do that. It is not necessary. Anybody can take this, take the Bodhisattva vow if one has compassion and genuine wish to attain Buddhahood or reach to the ultimate bodhicitta and perfect the understanding of the view, then one can take the Bodhisattva vow. But in order to take the Bodhisattva vow, then you need to do the preparations. So in this text mentions 8 different kinds of practice in order to prepare to generate the bodhicitta or take the Bodhisattva vow. So the first one, offerings, in order to accumulate merit and also to shrug off one's own desire and attachment and miserliness. As long as your motivation is pure and tuned towards Buddhahood for oneself and others, there's nothing that you cannot offer. If you can't afford to have substantial things, then you can imagine, manifest, and offer. So you can imagine the best of the best divine offerings. So doing that, your mind becomes more flexible, malleable, open, and more acceptable and more receptive. And then second is prostration. So you offer prostration and homage to Buddhas and Bodhisattvas so that your defilements will be purified, defilements of negative actions will be purified, and especially the emotions, especially your pride will decrease. So as long as you have pride, then it is very difficult to bow down to anybody. If you cannot bow down, then it will be difficult for one to attain knowledge and wisdom. And then the third one is taking refuge in the second chapter. The second chapter is called, the title of the text, the chapter title of the chapter is Confession, although there are four different practices: offering, prostration, taking refuge, and confessing and purifying the negative thoughts and actions one has committed. So, the third, taking refuge. Taking refuge is considered the most important. It is the fundamental practice in Buddhism. So, to enter the path of the training, the meditation, taking precepts, you need to take refuge first. So in order to lay the foundation for different stages of the path that leads to Buddhahood, the attainment of Buddhahood, we need to take refuge. And the actual refuge, what is the actual object of refuge? There is the absolute object of refuge, absolute refuge, and then the relative refuge. So here we are basically talking about the relative refuge. The absolute refuge, it always goes to the nature of things. The ultimate bodhicitta, the Tathagata Garbha, is no other than the ultimate object of refuge, and recognizing, actualizing, experiencing, and perfecting the understanding and the realization of the Tathagata Garbha, or the basic nature of one's own mind, the intrinsic nature of one's own mind, that is the ultimate absolute refuge. So in order to reach to that state, then we take as a symbol, then we take the relative refuge. So the outer relative symbolic refuge. So what is the necessary causes and conditions required to take refuge? In order to take somebody as your protector, as your boss, you need to have some kind of respect, and you have to have confidence in that. If I take a person as an example, so you need to have confidence. You need to trust that person. So first is the trust, the confidence in the object of refuge, that by taking refuge, one can really benefit. The object of refuge can protect you from the temporary and ultimate fears. So first is the devotion, the faith. There are four different kinds of devotion mentioned in the Buddhist texts. So first is called the lucid faith or inspiring faith. For instance, when you see a statue of a Buddha, you feel something, you feel drawn towards the Buddha, since you have heard something about, or through the blessings of the Buddha, then you feel something special about the Buddha. And you want, that is the lucid faith or the inspiring faith or the devotion. Second is the devotion of wishing. So wishing kind of devotion. For instance, you see somebody who is learned and accomplished, and you also want to become learned and accomplished. So that is the second devotion, the devotion of wishing, wanting to attain knowledge and wisdom. Third, more assuring kind of a devotion, the rational devotion, that's called the rational devotion. So the devotion of having confidence through knowing the reason or the background. You know the background of the Buddha, or how Buddha is, the qualities of the Buddha. So through knowing the Buddha, the qualities of Buddha, you develop that confidence and trust in the Buddha. That is the third kind of devotion. And then the fourth one is not very far from the third one, but it is called the unconditional devotion. Just to make it more simple, unconditional devotion. No matter what, once you have taken refuge in the object of refuge, Buddha, Dharma and Sangha, you will never give up relying on Buddha, Dharma and Sangha. So developing such kind of resolve, determination, that is the non-regressive devotion or unconditional devotion. So to take refuge, you need to have the third and the fourth kind of devotion, particularly the fourth kind of devotion. So unwavering devotion, non-regressing devotion. The devotion that does not wane and become less or become less. So that kind of devotion. Through that kind of devotion, you take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha. And also these devotions are also based on understanding the reality that all compounded things are impermanent. Samsara is full of suffering. There's no end to the worldly things we do. So that kind of understanding. And the most important, since we are studying this Mahayana, the Bodhisattvayana path, the refuge is also based on compassion, loving kindness, equanimity, compassionate joy, bodhicitta. So you need to have that in order to take refuge. And refuge, actually, the essence of refuge or the nature of refuge is making a commitment. So you making a commitment or generating this commitment to wholeheartedly surrender to the object that can protect you from temporary and ultimate fears. So basically one who can protect you and save you and lead you away from suffering and the cause of suffering. We talk about, the Four Noble Truths. And when you take refuge, there are different kinds of refuge. There's the worldly refuge and the transcendental refuge. Okay, beyond worldly refuge. Worldly refuge is for the in order to achieve temporary gains, temporary benefits. So, and in order to be free from temporary fears and sufferings, then you take refuge in the trees, rocks, worldly gods, and so on, human beings, unenlightened. Human beings, those who are not enlightened. So taking refuge in that for the sake of temporary benefit is the worldly refuge. But when we take refuge, the motivation is the most important. So even if the object of refuge is trans-worldly or beyond worldly, transcendental, such as the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha, if you take refuge for temporary benefit, to be free from temporary fears and sufferings, then your refuge becomes worldly. So it doesn't become trans-worldly or transcendental kind of a refuge. So actually, in Buddhism, there are different different stages of the path or different forms of the path. So in the Sharvakayana, okay, we call it Theravada these days, in there, one takes refuge to the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha for just one lifetime. So you take refuge in Buddha, Dharma and Sangha as long as you are alive. So until the end of your life, then you take refuge. Because the reason is, when you take refuge, you receive the vow, the precept. According to that tradition or that school, believe that the vow is a form. It's a form, kind of a physical form. Not really physical, but intangible physical form, in intangible form. So, form, they disintegrate when you pass away. When your life ends, then these forms disintegrate. They are no more. So you cannot take it forward to the next life. So that's why they take refuge, and all the precepts that the precepts of the vow of a monk, nun, and so on, they take it for just one lifetime. So in the Mahayana, you take refuge until you and all beings attain Buddhahood. So until the ultimate result is attained, you take refuge. And you take refuge through the understanding of view, the emptiness, reality, and also compassion. So just to make it simple, because the detail is so much detail in the text, so you might get confused too, and we might end up spending the whole session here just talking about refuge. So when you take refuge, and also I'm not mentioning, the different kinds of the object of refuge, what is meant by Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. Okay, the outer Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, and then the inner Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. For instance, the inner Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha is mainly the Dharmakaya, the absolute Buddha. The Buddha is the one who is, we have to use this for the sake of, the one who embodies, wisdom, compassion, and power, the strength. I kind of mentioned yesterday what is meant by power here. The ability to show the truth, teach truth to other beings, that is the power, and liberate other beings from the suffering and the cause of suffering, that is the power. And the absolute Buddha is not compounded. It is the Tathagata Garbha. It is not subject to causes and conditions. So it is not compounded. And it is spontaneously present at all times, present in samsara, present in nirvana. And this Buddha, the absolute Buddha, you cannot reach by means of with the support of compounded path, compounded method, other causes, outside physical causes and conditions. You have to realize through your self-awareness, the intrinsic awareness. So that is the Buddha. And Dharma is the basically which is beyond, the ultimate Dharma, which is beyond all kinds of extremes, beyond conceptual reasoning, samme, and it is non-dual, and it cannot be reached through intellectual study. That's the absolute Dharma I'm talking about. And it is pure because it is free from all kinds of defilements. It is luminous, so it is endowed with all kinds of qualities, knowing and awareness. And it is the antidote for suffering and the cause of suffering. So that is the Dharma. And Sangha basically is the enlightened beings who really understands that all beings understand and accept that all beings have the Buddha nature equally, irrespective of which form of life. And then the understanding of reality, the realization of reality, that is the absolute object of refuge, Buddha, Dharma and Sangha. So now relatively we take refuge in the physical Buddha, Dharma and Sangha now. Okay? The emanation Buddha is the Shakyamuni Buddha, and the teachings is the scriptural teachings on, the sutra teachings, like Vinaya that deals with the discipline, Sutta that deals with the meditation, and Abhidharma that deals with the wisdom, generating wisdom. So that kind of teachings. And the Sangha, his disciples and followers. So to them we take refuge. So how do we take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha? Not as a savior or not as a God. So when we take refuge in the Buddha, we take refuge in the Buddha as the teacher, the guide. So Buddha is the guide, teacher, who teaches you truth and the method to understand and realize the truth. So we take refuge in Buddha as the teacher and Dharma as the actual protector, as the path. Dharma is the actual protector because only through studying and practicing the Dharma one can transcend suffering and the cause of suffering. One can bring an end to suffering and the cause of suffering. So ego clinging can only be uprooted through the practice of Dharma. So the actual protector is the Dharma, actual savior is the Dharma. And Sangha as the companion, as advisors on your path. So when you get sidetracked, then you have somebody to seek advice. So that is the Sangha who have studied, practiced, and experienced the truth taught in the teachings. So that's how we take refuge. So the sequence of taking refuge, basically, in the commentary it says that first you need to study the teachings. Before we take refuge, you study the teachings, and you study the teachings and develop some confidence in the truth and the methods for realizing the truth. Then once you develop that kind of confidence and conviction, then automatically you will feel devotion and inspired by the person who taught this, who taught the truth, who gave these teachings, then obviously you would like to take refuge, take that one that person as a teacher, as a guide, as a source of inspiration. So that's how, in order to perfect the, study and practice of your teachings, you need the support of somebody who has studied. That's how then you take refuge in the Sangha. So that's how refuge is taken. So here in the text it says that from now on until Buddhahood is attained, I take refuge in the Buddha, and I also take refuge in the Dharma and the Sangha. So here the refuge is taken until the Buddhahood is attained. So it's not just for one lifetime. It might take countless lifetimes, depending on the effort, the kind of effort you make, and the diligence you have. And then once you take refuge and receive the vow, the refuge vow, you need to keep the precepts. So you need to follow the precepts. So in order to keep the precepts, having taken refuge in the Buddha, you don't rely on other deities and gods as the ultimate source of refuge. For temporary benefit, yes, why not? But as the ultimate guide or ultimate source of refuge, you don't take that. And having taken refuge in the Dharma, you need to avoid causing harm on other beings, either mentally or physically. So the essence of taking refuge in the Dharma or practicing Dharma is not to harm other beings, at the very least. As a bodhisattva, one cannot imagine harming others, because the most important commitment of the bodhisattva is to help other beings. So helping other beings and harming them is completely contradictory. They don't sync at all. So having taken refuge in the Sangha, then you don't take the advice of those who hold wrong views, such as there's no cause and effect, there's no enlightenment, there's no samsara, there's no nirvana, and so on. But it doesn't mean that you cannot be, generally friends with them. You can have, but just not to take advice for your spiritual practice. If you are seeking the truth of dependent arising, truth of shunyata, the truth of prajna paramita. So that's essentially refuge, how you take refuge. So the benefit of taking refuge, I have to say this, you only become Buddhist once you take refuge in Buddha, Dharma and Sangha. So once you take refuge, you become Buddhist. If you want to label yourself and identify yourself as a Buddhist, then you become Buddhist once you take refuge in Buddha, Dharma and Sangha. And you become a vessel for taking any kind of precepts, such as the Sarvakayana precept, the vow of individual liberation, Vinaya vow. There are 7 different kinds of Vinaya vow, not just monk. You can also take a lay Vinaya vow. Upasika vow, it's called. So lay practitioner's vow. And there's the novice vow, there's the bhikshu, the fully ordained vow. So there's also like a one-day vow. you can take. And then the bodhisattva vow, if you want to take the bodhisattva vow, generate bodhicitta ritually, then you need to take refuge first. And once you take refuge, I think one of the most important benefit is you become more vigilant, more mindful, and appreciative of the truth. Like cause and effect, and so on. And then, after refuge, you need to clear the obstructing conditions that obstruct, the conditions that obstruct the generation of bodhicitta. So, and for that reason, then you need to confess the negative actions. So all the negative actions of body, speech and mind, you confess wholeheartedly to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. So you imagine that there's Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. And again, negative actions. What is negative actions? There's no such thing as predestined positive or negative actions, which has been created by somebody else for you, is not there in Buddhism. So everything is created, is temporary, out of one's own wrong views, distorted attitude. Whatever is done, whatever action is committed through wrong views and negative emotions, like negative attitude, that is the negative action. So physical or mental action, this is the negative action. And these are temporary. These negative actions or positive actions are not the nature of your being, as I mentioned earlier. So they can be purified. It is said in the teachings that negative actions, they don't have any good quality. The only good quality of negative action is they can be purified. They can be confessed and purified. So in order to do that, you need to apply 4 powers of antidote. So first is the support. So the object to which you confess the negative actions. So Buddhas and Bodhisattvas here, Buddha, Dharma and Sangha, you can say. So in front of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, or Buddha, Dharma and Sangha, you confess the negative actions. You can confess your negative actions to your friends, but there is a big chance that you will not be 100% honest with your friend, because you think that your friend is ordinary, there's no clairvoyance. That your friend wouldn't know what you're thinking. So to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, whether you hide or no, it is transparent, it's clear, because they have clairvoyance, they have wisdom, they can see even if you hide. So it's more wholehearted, you will do it more wholeheartedly, more genuinely. So the first is the support for confession and purification. And second is you need to expose your faults. Expose all your faults, all the negative actions you have committed, the negative actions you remember, you don't remember. You expose everything honestly. So you don't hide anything. If you hide, the negative actions will not be purified completely. You shouldn't hide at all. So that is exposing and recognizing that it is faulty. There is no benefit in accumulating or committing and accumulating negative actions and negative thoughts and attitudes. So you bring out everything, expose. Third is to apply the antidote. So as antidote for negative actions, non-virtuous thoughts and actions, you apply, you make a commitment to, and also do as much as possible positive thoughts and actions. So you generate positive thoughts, virtuous thoughts, and engage in virtuous actions, such as being generous, practicing generosity, doing prostrations as we know, making offerings, and so on. There's so many different ways of doing that. And meditating is the most powerful, one of the most powerful antidote for negative actions is doing negative actions. And then most importantly, not to forget bodhicitta, the mind of awakening. So generating that intention to benefit oneself and others, to bring enlightenment for oneself and others. And then fourth is to make a commitment not to repeat in the future, even at the cost of one's own life, because it is not good, it is detrimental to one's own spiritual progress. It really defiles it really buries your innate goodness, the absolute bodhicitta or the Tathagata Garbha, the Buddha nature. So these are the 4 practices mentioned in the 2nd chapter. And going to the 3rd chapter, is rejoicing. So it is an antidote for jealousy. So we need to rejoice. We need to practice rejoicing in the. We rejoice in the happiness, bliss, and happiness of other beings, because according to the teachings, all sentient beings are suffering. So if you find somebody who is enjoying a moment of bliss and happiness, then you rejoice instead of having jealousy towards that. As a bodhisattva, for a bodhisattva, the ultimate wish, the only wish is that all beings are happy. All beings become enlightened. Seeing a person, a suffering person, enjoying a moment of bliss and happiness is nothing compared to, the Buddhahood, the happiness of Buddhahood. And also rejoice in the cause of happiness, such as when you see people doing virtuous things, such as engaging in philanthropic activities of benefiting others, building schools, hospitals, working for others, helping others. And then we rejoice in the practice of the path that leads to freedom from samsara. And you also rejoice in the attainment of the nirvana, with some individuals through the practice of meditation. And most importantly, you rejoice in the virtue accumulated by individuals that will lead to the perfection of wisdom, Buddhahood. You rejoice in that. You also rejoice in the activities of Bodhisattva. So basically you rejoice in everything, every good thing that is happening around. And sixth, is requesting the Buddhas to turn the wheel of Dharma. So requesting the Buddhas to give teachings, because only through these teachings the darkness of ignorance can be dispelled. Because when Buddhas give teachings, they teach the truth, and that brings light, wisdom. Only wisdom can dispel the darkness of ignorance. So you request the Buddhas to give teachings according to the capacities, intellectual capacities of different beings. Not everybody can take one teachings. So 84,000 different kinds of teachings has been given. So likewise, you request the Buddhas to turn the wheel of Dharma continuously and not let beings fall into the darkness of ignorance. Then you also request the Buddhas not to pass into nirvana, pass into nirvana, like just as Buddha Shakyamuni, Siddhartha Gautama passed into nirvana, parinirvana in Kushinagar. So that is the end of activity. So you can't receive teachings anymore from that Buddha. So you request Buddhas not to pass into nirvana until all beings are liberated and placed in the state of full Buddhahood. So these are actually antidotes for wrong views, wrong view. And then the most important, the last one, is to dedicate the merit. So whatever good actions you have done through making offerings, offering prostrations, taking refuge, practicing, confessing the negative actions, practicing, rejoicing in the virtuous thoughts and activities of other beings, requesting to remain without passing into nirvana, and requesting to turn the wheel of Dharma continuously. All the merit you have accumulated, you dedicate for the enlightenment of all beings, for the liberation, enlightenment of all beings. And you also make aspiration that as a bodhisattva, you can manifest. When you really become bodhisattva, when you attain enlightenment, then you can manifest as things, different things, like, for those who wish to have medicine, may I become a medicine. For those who want to have a ride, may I become a car. That kind of wish, aspiration you make. So after doing this, then once you have prepared yourself to take the bodhisattva vow, then the actual act of taking the bodhisattva vow. So in the third chapter, then you take the bodhisattva vow. So how you take the bodhisattva vow or ritually generate the bodhisattva vow or bodhicitta. First, you need to have the teacher from whom you can take the bodhisattva vow. So the teacher has to be somebody who keeps the discipline, who has generated renunciation, who has taken the bodhisattva vow and maintained the bodhisattva vow purely. And in addition to that, the one who is learned in the Mahayana teachings and who has practiced and accomplished the practice, the Mahayana practice. At the very least, the one who has the bodhisattva vow and who is compassionate and who is concerned, who is really, really interested or committed to the enlightenment of other beings, the students, so to speak, at the very least. So from that kind of a teacher, you receive the bodhisattva vow. So when you take the bodhisattva vow, first you invoke the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and then the lineage teachers, the gurus, by chanting the prayer 3 times, and then you take the bodhisattva vow, just as the Buddhas of the past generated the bodhicitta and made a commitment to practice the path in order to actualize the bodhicitta. Following in their footsteps, I also generate the bodhicitta of aspiring to get enlightened for the sake of other beings, and I make this commitment to practice the path and keep the precepts. So that's how you take the bodhisattva vow. So you generate the bodhicitta of aspiration, the aspiring bodhicitta and entering bodhicitta together. In the other tradition, this is the Nagarjuna tradition, but in the other tradition, you don't take it like that. In the other tradition, first you have to take refuge, then after that you have to receive the Vinaya, the Pratimoksha vow, then you receive the bodhisattva vow of aspiring bodhicitta. So you generate the aspiring bodhicitta, and then you read the text, the Mahayana text, which explains the bodhicitta. And then, if you can, then you take the bodhisattva vow of entering. That's how it is. It will depend on the individual. So you have to take it gradually. But in the Nagarjuna tradition, you take it together. So as long as you have compassion, if you have wish to enlighten yourself and other beings, you can take the bodhisattva vow. So after that, when you take the bodhisattva vow, one most important thing is the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas you have invoked, they are the witness. And together with that, you also invite all the sentient beings as a witness. So after taking the bodhisattva vow or generating the bodhicitta, then you uplift yourself by thinking and chanting the benefit, the virtue of taking the bodhisattva vow or generating that, saying that today my life my birth has become meaningful. Because through generating the bodhicitta, I can benefit myself and all other beings. I can reach the state of Buddhahood, unsurpassable Buddhahood. So it is like a blind person finding a treasure underneath his or her house. So like that, then within this, the mound of the impurities, you have been able to dig out the treasure of bodhicitta that will lead you to the state where you can bring infinite benefit to oneself and others. So, speaking out this, you extol basically the enlightened qualities of the taking bodhisattva vow. And then that's how you rejoice and celebrate yourself after taking the bodhisattva vow. And then you ask the Buddhas and bodhisattvas and the sentient beings to celebrate together the occasion of taking the bodhisattva vow or generating the bodhicitta. So, so that's how the bodhicitta or the bodhicitta is being generated. So, as I mentioned earlier, the first 3 chapters talk about how to explain how to take the bodhisattva vow or generate the bodhicitta. So the relative bodhicitta, so that slowly you can develop the ultimate bodhicitta. And then the next 3 chapters, the middle 3 chapters, concern the methods to sustain and nurture the bodhicitta. So basically the practice of mindfulness and the practice of the 6 paramitas and so on. So mindfulness and vigilance are very important methods to sustain and nurture the bodhicitta. In other words, the bodhisattva vow. So basically, how to, these 3 chapters explain how to keep the precepts. There are 3 different kinds of precepts I mentioned. The precept of not harming others, refraining from harming others, precept of gathering the virtues, the good thoughts and actions in order to accumulate merit, and the precept of helping others, benefiting others. So these are the 3 main precepts of a bodhisattva once a person has taken bodhisattva vow and become a bodhisattva. Anyway, instead of going into these details, I thought that in the next sessions, next 2 sessions, we will try to try to extract something from the 9th chapter, the absolute bodhicitta, so that we get some more assurance, some more information on what we are actually doing it here. So I think if you have any questions now, you can ask. You can read the root text. They're quite straightforward, but to go into the details, you need to read the commentary. But you can read the verses. They're beautiful and kind of inspiring, because the translations in English are almost like a commentary. In the Tibetan, it's not like that. Sometimes it's very difficult. It's completely different from the commentary. It's really hidden. and completely abbreviated and condensed. Sorry that I couldn't go verse by verse. I think it will take one whole year. If you go verse by verse, it isn't even necessary, I think, to do that.
Can I ask you, Buddhism is practiced all over, many countries, and do they form a separate type of Buddhism, or is there some differences between the countries, say Cambodia, say Thailand, Burma, Tibet? These are all major centers. So
Okay.
how would you, there is an underlying theme, but there would be some differences also.
Yes, there is difference. So, if I say from the point of view of institution, it's institutionalized these days. So there are three actually, basically two forms of Buddhism. One is called the Sarvakayana Buddhism. Today they call it the Theravada. Theravada is just one of the many schools, basically. In fact, it's one of the many, there are 18 sub-schools in there. So Theravada, and then the Mahayana. So His Holiness the Dalai Lama says that's the Pali tradition and the Sanskrit tradition, mainly the Nalanda tradition. So the Mahayana, so there are two. In the Mahayana, there are two. There's the causal vehicle and the resultant vehicle. So the one practiced in the Himalayas, especially like places like Tibet, Bhutan, Nepal, Ladakh, and so on. So that is the Vajrayana, the tantric form of Buddhism. It's an esoteric form of Buddhism. So there are also a difference in the view. Since there is difference in the view, in the approach also, the path, there is also difference. And the attainment of the result is slightly different. So the emphasis in the Sarvakayana school mainly is the first discourse that happened in Varanasi, Sarnath, Deer Park. Four Noble Truths is the emphasis. So all the teachings, path, they are fundamentally based on these Four Noble Truths. And in the Mahayana one, in addition to, this is basic, all the Buddhist traditions need to practice this. So this, in addition to the Four Noble Truths, then there is the second turning of the wheel of Dharma, like Prajnaparamita, given at Burgess Peak in Rajgir, in Bihar. And then in many different places, such as Vaishali, the third turning of the wheel of Dharma, such as the teachings on Buddha nature, the differentiation of relative and absolute, in order to uproot all kinds of references. So there is a difference. There is a difference. So I think around the world, I think in the different groups of people practicing Buddhism, they're either related to the Sarvakayana form of Buddhism or the Mahayana form of Buddhism. I think the Pali tradition or the Sanskrit tradition there's Pali tradition or the Sanskrit tradition, as it is been called. I forgot to actually, I wanted to this. Yesterday one of you asked about enlightenment, nirvana, enlightenment. I think I can explain, maybe I forgot to explain through this example. For instance, you are dreaming. So you are having a nightmare. So you have a nightmare. When you have a nightmare, then you have dreadful experience and you go through all kinds of sufferings and confusion. And suddenly, somebody makes you wake up, somebody wakes you up, and when you wake up, it's not there. Whatever you experience in the dream, in your, that dreadful dream, the nightmare, it is not there. So it disappears. So that is the nirvana. That is enlightenment. It is one kind of enlightenment, or the nirvana. This kind of nirvana, basically, as you ask, in the Sharvakayana, the nirvana, which is based on the Four Noble Truths. Then there's another kind of nirvana, okay, full Buddhahood, nirvana. Then, when you before you sleep, you did not have dream, you didn't have any experience, and when you wake up from dream, then the nightmare, all these experiences, dreadful experiences, disappear. So you are freed from suffering, but there has never been a suffering. There has never been that dreadful experience. From the very beginning, before you slept, it all happened in between, in your dream. So there's this difference between, the Pali tradition, and then Pali tradition wisdom, and the Nalanda tradition wisdom. And that also answers, outside, one of our friends, I think she's sitting at the back, asks, what is the origin of confusion? What is the origin of ego clinging and confusion? I think this answers this question. Ego clinging, everything happened in the middle. In the beginning, there was no, a dream. There was no experience, the dreadful experience. There's no dream in the beginning, before you went to bed. And then after you wake up from the dream, it's not there. So the origin of that is the basis, is the basic nature. Okay? Any more questions, or too confusing, or?
We are talking about interdependence, and we are talking about individualism. So when we talk about individualism, then it seems that there is nothing. But when we talk about interdependence, then I feel that there is everything. So I'm actually confused. So yeah.
Okay, I think you're asking me about individual liberation and interdependence. So in Buddhism, we talk about individual liberation and interdependence. In order to, now I'll approach it separately. Individual liberation means if you practice the path, if you practice meditation, and through that meditation, then you will be able to get rid of your confusion and suffering yourself. That will not lead to the elevation of the suffering of others. The confusion, the confusion in other beings will not disappear. The best you can do is, once you attain realization, you can teach the method, teach the truth and the method to reach the truth, reality. That's all you can do. But when we talk about this is something like a path language, actually, when it's related to the path. But when you talk about interdependence, it is the basic view we are talking about. So everything is dependent on each other. All compounded things are impermanent, means we are compounded. This gathering means it is subject to causes and conditions. For example, for I to exist, you need a reference of you. Because of you, then there's the I, you, and for example, right hand. In order to label this as a right hand, you need a reference left as a reference. So that is the interdependence. There's outer interdependence and inner interdependence. So there are different levels of interdependence. And interdependence essentially means shunyata, emptiness. Relatively, it is interdependent. Things are interdependent, dependent on each other. Things arise through causes and conditions. But if you really analyze and examine logically, then you can't see an independently existing phenomena having an independent entity. That is emptiness. That is what is emptiness in Buddhism.
Can you please explain emptiness a little bit more?
Okay. I think the different kinds of emptiness. Okay, just I was using this book actually the other day when I explained, but I think I will use another example, I don't know, which might be more confusing. So another example is like reflection in the mirror. Okay, when you look at the mirror, so your appearance appear in the mirror, your reflection appears in the mirror. In the mirror, you're not there in the mirror anyway. But your reflection, your image appears in the mirror because of the causes and conditions. There's a glass, light, and you standing in front of the glass. So because of that coming together the causes and conditions, then there is this image in the mirror. But that image does not exist. At the same time, it does not exist. It doesn't function as a person, It's a bit difficult to explain emptiness, actually. But it is not negation anyway. It is not negation. Negation is voidness, isn't it? It is completely empty. Do you have a better idea to explain emptiness?
I was only also thinking of the example of the rainbow.
Yeah. Yeah, rainbow is another example. It's beautiful and then you see, but you cannot go and cut and bring, home the beautiful rainbow. Only because of that, the corresponding causes and conditions, there's a rainbow there.
There, yet not there.
Yes. There is this union of clarity and emptiness. There's a union of appearance and emptiness. Appearing, yet it does not have independent existence is actually what it is when we say empty of nature. Yeah, we are not saying that it is empty. It is empty of nature. Because there are two things when we say emptiness, which is this empty, but there's also the ness part. So it's like no and yes together. So that's why the concept of non-duality works